Good evening all, and welcome. Do you get along with your neighbours? Do you like them? Do you think they like you? Could they be creepy? Could they be sinister? Do you even know them at all? Well, I don't really know my neighbours. I hope they're not like this, and I hope neither are yours. Just a brief shout out that I've collaborated in the making of a book, which is now live. If you would like to read it, the link is in the description and it would mean a lot. And if you're reading it or have already finished reading it, please leave a review on Amazon. They're extremely helpful. But anyway, for now, it's time to get comfortable and let the darkness take control. Spring 2014 was a slow season for my father's business. The weather is nice and the roads are clear, which means slow shifts at an auto shop. It was mid-April, around 4 p.m. The wind was pulling in a nice spring breeze when my dad, Bill, was walking along the side of his shop. It happened to overlook a small stream and running trail, which he enjoyed gazing at near the end of his shift. The side of his building ran along the top of a steep hill, which turned into a path. We heard a ruffling in the wind, and about halfway down the hill, he sees a big blue tarp. Being very proud of his business and its appearance, he starts to climb down the hill. He was just about to grab for it, about 15 feet away, to toss it in the dump, when he saw a car pull into the lot. He turned around and went to help his customer. When 5:30 p.m. rolls around, he closes up and goes home, forgetting the tarp. The next afternoon, Bill is sitting in his office when 3 policemen came in. They asked my father and co-worker a bunch of questions about any suspicious behavior they might have seen. Side note, my dad is extremely charismatic and friendly. He oftentimes talks people into sharing information with him that they really shouldn't. He looks like someone you can trust, and you can, and he seemed to always have the insider details about things like this. He used his humor to make people feel comfortable, which helped getting strangers to open up to him. Anyway, Bill and his co-worker Hank are speaking with a female police officer when she lets it slip that a body has been discovered just down the hill. "Oh crap, I was down there yesterday cleaning. I didn't see any body though," Bill said. "Around what time? Did you happen to see a large blue and white tarp while you were cleaning the area?" she asked intensely. Actually, yeah. I almost grabbed it yesterday but ended up getting distracted." She asked him more questions about what time and what he saw. When he asked her if the body was found in the tarp, "Yes, it was. A woman jogging found it this morning at 10:30 a.m. My dad was floored. He was there just yesterday. And after a few more questions, the police all head to the crime scene to finish the initial investigation. No one was allowed on the scene, and the police were asking that passers-by not take pictures. Flash forward a few days. The police went back to my father's shop. They noticed the security cameras set around the building, and they were hoping that they might have caught something on tape. While transferring the data over, my dad started asking more questions about the murder. He learned it was a middle-aged man that had been stabbed to death. Not too much to go on as it seemed. "Hey, you know there are a couple of meth heads that live in the shack behind our shop. It's connected to the bar?" Bill started talking about his own predictions for who had done it. He continued, "Yeah, we have a lot of problems with them, stealing scrap metal from the back, letting their dogs run wild. Even had them threaten to shoot me once, and I saw them spraying their dogs with water to quit barking. You should check them out." The officer nodded, gathered the rest of his things and left. "Hey, Hank, let's go down there, see if we can find anything cool," my father whispered to his co-worker. All right, I guess. It couldn't do any harm," Hank replied hesitantly. They started down the hill where the trench was found. The grass was flat, and the tarp was now gone. They walked around for 15 minutes or so when Bill headed up the stream a little ways. The trail runs under a main road and then leads to a man-made lake. Just under the bridge, the water starts to get heavier and the trees are a bit thicker. He noticed a red Lowe's cart on one of the trees. "I'm taking that to the shop," he thought, as he ran over to pull it out the stream. Calling over Hank for help, the two of them fish it out and start wheeling it back up the hill. Suddenly, my dad stops. He sees something on the cart. "What is that rusty-looking stuff?" Hank stops, looking at the cart. "Is that blood?" They looked closer, and sure enough, blood was all over the cart. On the handle, on the wheels, and the side. But it wasn't only blood. They started to notice hair. Human hair. Utterly stunned, my dad calls the policewoman he had been talking to the previous day and explained what they found. For whatever reason, the police department were very skeptical that this was evidence. At first, they didn't even believe my father. When he told them it made no sense to make it up, they sent out a car. There were 2 police officers and a CSI. The CSI asked my dad why he thought it was blood. "It looks like blood, sir." "I'm not sure. How do you know that it's human hair?" the CSI asked. "Because it looks like human hair?" my dad said sarcastically. Why did he seem so hesitant? They used a chemical test, and sure enough, it tested positive for human blood. They took the cart as evidence and thanked my dad. Again, my dad tried to give his opinion on who the mystery killer might be. He suggested again that they speak to the crazy neighbors behind his auto shop. Still, no information was taken down, and they left with what they had. 2 days pass. My dad is leaving the shop to get some things from Costco. There is a small dirty alley that leads to the main road just behind his work. In the past, it had been blocked by one of the meth addicts' cars. They were complaining to my dad and his boss about the business driving cars back and forth through the alley, disrupting them. He notices it's open and decides to take the shortcut to his destination. But something was off. He saw the usual blocked car sitting in front of the shack. The door was wide open, and there was someone sitting on their knees with their upper body inside the car. He got in his car and crept up, just a little, so he could see what was happening. He right away recognized the skinny red-headed woman as the female that lived in the shack. It was the shack guy's wife/girlfriend. He didn't know exactly. She was on her hands and knees surrounded by hard chemicals, bleach, Comet, OxyClean, and much more. My dad had said that he knew right then that they were guilty. For one, why would someone be scrubbing their car with straight chemicals? No water, no rinsing. It was in the middle of the day on a hot June afternoon. Second, they happened to be only 2 blocks away from a local car wash. He said it felt off, and he knew to trust his instincts. She kept scrubbing and scrubbing the passenger side floor, and he pulled out his phone and started recording her. Now, he's known this woman and her significant other for a few years now. Like I said, they complained about my father's workers, and he complained about their dogs on and off for a while. It was all harmless bickering. My dad, always trying to be the funny guy, yells out his window as he's driving past. "Covering up for a murder?" He laughed and drove away, hearing her say something explicit as he drove off. This time when he called the police, they took it very seriously. He explained that she was cleaning the car aggressively and that it seemed like she was trying to bleach something out the car. The next day, when the police department went to talk with the residents of the shack, the day after that, they made an arrest. After searching the shack, they found a large blood stain soaked into the plywood floor. Once the blood was seen, the wife or girlfriend crumbled and told the police everything. It was her husband/boyfriend, and the victim. The victim was named Rich. He had gone over to the house to shoot up and get high. Someone ended up accusing Rich of putting some of the dope aside for himself, and things got heated. Eventually, the husband started to physically fight with Rich when he stabbed him. He bled out on the floor and died. They didn't know what to do, so they stole the Lowe's cart to move him around, loaded him in the car, wrapped him up in the tarp, and pushed his body down the hill. They ditched the cart, thinking the river would wash it down far enough that it wouldn't be found. My dad and Hank sat in the car while they watched the police arrest Don, the suspected murderer. He took a video of that as well, and my dad actually said, "Ha! Killer," in the video. My dad says that he's going to start a PI business because he solved a murder on his own. Yeah, right, Dad. This story happened when I was pretty young. I'm 22 now and remember it vividly. Growing up, we had a carriage house behind our home that my parents rented out. It was a small one-bedroom apartment. The last man who lived in there gave me the creeps. Apparently, he moved down to Savannah to be close to his mother. He did his laundry in our house, and I always hid from him when he was around. Despite tucking myself away behind shelves and around corners, he always found me. He thought it was funny to ask when I was going to start doing his laundry, while looming over me in his dirty vest. Although my parents believed I was just being shy, I knew there was something wrong to this man. He had the unhinged grin and cold black eyes so often associated to the villains in your typical story. It was enough to set off alarm bells in my young mind. In the days leading up to the incident, my parents noticed his behavior was strange. Every morning they heard him throwing up violently from his nights of heavy drinking. He was fired from his job working at the gas/electric company in the city for driving recklessly in the company car. One warm night in August, my mother was in the middle of giving me a bath when we heard a huge bang. My mother was immediately furious with my siblings, who she assumed broke something very big and expensive. She ran downstairs, and when she came back, I could tell the situation was far more serious than she'd previously suspected. My mum hoisted me out the bathtub, wrapped me in a towel, and rushed me downstairs in one smooth motion. When we got down, I realized that all of our windows had blown out, covering our home with shards of glass. My brother was on the phone with 911, and my sister was already halfway out the door. We all congregated in the front of the house. I remember being very self-conscious that I was in a towel, especially since the neighbors began to congregate outside. It turned out that the man renting the carriage house decided to take his life that night by cutting the gas line and lighting one last cigarette. He knew the line to cut because he worked for the gas company. Normally, the explosion would have obliterated our house as well. However, the termite damage in the carriage house's attic roof caused the roof to blow upwards. If it wasn't damaged, the explosion would have blown the walls outwards, which would have reduced our home to rubble. Who knows what would have happened to my family if that had happened. I don't know anyone who's been thankful for termites. The carriage house tenant didn't die immediately. Neighbors found him walking around the alley bleeding like crazy and laughing maniacally. He passed away in the hospital a few days later. It turns out his mother didn't even know he'd moved back to the city, even though he'd come to be closer to her, or so he says. I didn't know why anyone would choose to end their life knowing that they could end a whole family's life in the process. Perhaps he didn't know. But I find that hard to believe since he worked for the gas company and specialized in gas. Maybe he was too mentally ill to realize how his actions would impact us, or maybe he just didn't care. Regardless, I'm glad I didn't meet him again, and hope never to meet anyone like him again. I live in a house on a cul-de-sac with my mother, 2 brothers, and a roommate. I work 2 part-time jobs, one of which is in the same office my mum works at. She's a doctor, and I work with medical records. I'm 20, my 2 brothers, some twins, are 17, and my mother is 57. The roommate is 18. We also live very close to a volunteer firehouse that blares an extremely loud alarm when there's an emergency. Everyone within a few miles can hear the alarm. We are middle class and live in a modest house but has a large front yard as our driveway is super long. 7 years ago, we moved into our house, and for a while everything was chill until we found out about our crazy neighbor, Bob. He has extremely paranoid schizophrenia and legitimately believes that the government is after him. He thinks that people are trying to brainwash him via microwaves, and he freaks out whenever he hears a plane pass because he thinks they're after him. Whenever the firehouse blares the alarm, Bob calls the police because he thinks someone's after him, and every time they have to tell him that he can't do that. He also made some odd comments about one of my brothers too. For a few years we didn't hear much from him, until one day he sent a letter in the mail trying to sell us his baseball cards for $1 million. Apparently, he sent the same letter to everyone else in the cul-de-sac. Everyone discarded the letters. All our neighbors are aware of Bob. They thought he was just a little crazy, but mainly harmless. We thought so too. We were wrong. Last winter, we began to find mysterious footprints in the snow. It was a human's footprints across the front yard of the house. We knew it wasn't any of our footprints because none of us walked so far out into that part of our yard like that. As I said earlier, our front yard is very large. We just shrugged it off as something odd, and for a while Bob hadn't bothered us, and we weren't thinking much of him at the time. Fast forward a few days, police were at Bob's house. Apparently, he's being evicted. We breathed a sigh of relief, because he was weird, but we didn't think much of it. The next day was a normal day, nothing odd, until Bob showed up at work. He started to rant to everyone about how he's in the military, before going to my mum's secretary, asking to have lab work done on him. This was raising a bunch of red flags because my mum never told him where she worked. Not only that, but to find my mum's secretary, you'd have to go back behind the main row of secretaries, as each doctor has their own, and there are about 15 in each, into a small area where a large printer is. My mum's secretary is in that smaller area, and it should be impossible for a stranger who hasn't been there before to know where she was. How the hell did Bob know where to find her and ask for my mum, despite never being there before? And never telling him her name. This freaks us out, and we decided to do some research on Bob. It turns out his father was ex-military, and that Bob owns a bunch of firearms. His shady behavior towards my mum and showing up at our work could only mean one thing. He was stalking us, and he's dangerous. At the very least, we began to suspect that he was going through our mail, as it's very likely his footprints were those that were in the snow. My mum got a peace order. It's kind of like a restraining order, and then notified all the other neighbors about what happened. We thought maybe things would die down, but nope. Today he was in the parking lot, staring blankly at one of the secretaries. She said he was sweating and looking a little off. He didn't stop staring at her and asking about my mum. Now everyone in the family is on edge. He has guns. He's been stalking my mum at work and is being evicted. He doesn't have much to lose if he did something dangerous. We notified the police, and they are making sure to lock the doors and install security cameras so that we can see if he comes onto our property again. No one is allowed to be home alone until this craziness stops, and until we know for a fact that we will be safe. Also, my brothers, roommates, and I went to dinner with my dad and his girlfriend. Mum stayed home, and apparently my mum was home alone. She heard strange noises and our dogs were going crazy. And a few days after, he threatened to kill my brother, and we called the police. I just hope we don't meet again, as unlikely as that sounds. In 2008, my boyfriend Jonathan and I moved into our first apartment together. We were so excited that we would have our own place and finally be adults. It didn't take long into our new apartment to spot the complex's resident weirdo. He lived in our building on the 3rd floor, and we were on the 1st. He was late 50s to early 60s and had a face that seemed to lack all emotion. He drove an incredibly rusty old truck and would go outside to feed the wild cats in the area every day. He seemed harmless, weird, but harmless. One day, Jonathan and I get back home after work, and he's outside standing beside his truck. His eyes are glued to us, and shivers run down my spine. Jonathan tells me that he doesn't want to get out of the car because he's freaked out. I don't want him to know that I'm on edge too, so I reassure him that we're in the open, it's daylight, and nothing bad is going to happen. We exit the vehicle, and I open the trunk to get my backpack because I was planning on grading my students' vocabulary quizzes. And when I close the trunk and look up, the creepy old man is right in front of me. His eyes are wide, as if he has just seen something that unnerved him. "Oh, I'm sorry, you scared me. Is everything okay?" I say. "No," he responds. "That woman that just moved into the 4th floor is awful." His voice reminded me of one I've heard before, but I couldn't put my finger on it. "Well, sir, I haven't actually met her. Is there—" She called the officers about these cats, and now they're going to call animal control on them. "Oh, wow. I'm so sorry." "Yeah, I figured you guys would feel the same. This place is a hellhole, and they've gone to shit the past year." He puts his hand to his mouth, as if he's about to tell us a secret. "I used to work for them, you know. I'd open up and close the pools and clean up a bit around the property. They fired me a few months back, once they found out about my lifestyle. They don't get our lifestyle," he says, moving his finger around to himself and Jonathan. I assumed that he meant because we were gay men, but even now I'm not entirely sure. "Damn, that's messed up," Jonathan says, trying to edge his way closer to the apartment door. "Yeah, they're a bunch of knobheads, and I hope that new girl hears that." He says it at points, and I realize I've heard his voice before. A Nightmare Before Elm Street. He sounds just like Freddy Krueger. "Well, I hope it's not too bad. I start working there on Monday," Jonathan says. "Well, good luck. Try and keep your personal business quiet, otherwise you might be out of a job. Just don't turn into one of those assholes, or karma may come back to get you," the old man said, chuckling to himself. Jonathan and I nervously laugh as well. "Well, good luck with the cats. We'll see you around," I say, putting my hand on Jonathan's lower back and slightly pushing him towards our apartment. "Alright guys, nice talking to you," he said, still chuckling to himself. Although it was more creepy than joyous, it reminded me of the Joker from Batman, a maniacal laugh. A month passes and we see the old man occasionally. The cats were still there, so we figure things worked out for him. However, we hadn't had another conversation with him, thankfully. Jonathan managed to keep his job at the office, where there was not a trace of homophobia. And that's when we heard the news. "Evicted?" I said, when Jonathan came home from work one day. "Why are they evicting him?" "Well, my boss says that the office receives harassing calls from him on a weekly basis. Even some other tenants have reported being harassed by him." "I mean, yeah, he's creepy, but is that enough to evict him?" "I guess so. They gave him a week to get all his stuff out and move." A week later, Jonathan was at the office, and the old man came to return his keys. Jonathan was at the front desk, and had already phoned for the manager. But the old man started whispering things under his breath. "Get out of here. They're all awful. Just get out." The building manager grabs the keys and escorts the creepy old man out of the building. A week went by, and we hadn't seen any trace of the old man. Jonathan and I are watching TV around midnight, when I hear a knock on the door. I pause the show thinking that it might be a neighbor complaining that our TV is too loud. I look through our peephole and see the creepy old man staring at me through it. A smile covers his face, but it's unnatural. I've never seen a smile so big in my life, and it makes my whole body run cold. I start to stumble back from the door. Jonathan sees that I'm pale with fear. "Babe, what's wrong?" he whispers. "It's the old man," I whisper, tears welling up in my eyes. Jonathan gets off the couch and stands behind me. We're both facing the door, and the man knocks again, and it startles me back to reality. I start walking into the kitchen, and I grab all the knives that I can. I tell Jonathan to go into the bathroom, which is the only room without a window, and to call the police. I start to walk to the bathroom too when I hear keys start jangling against our door. I look back to find that the security bolt was not folded against the door. This works like a hotel room security bolt, where someone can use a key to open the deadbolt, but as long as the security bolt is across the door, it won't open fully. I silently made my way over to the door, knife in hand, and slowly and quietly fold the security bolt across the door. As soon as it touches the door, the old man bangs into the door, making me jump back a bit, almost dropping the knife. Then it went quiet. No keys, no knocks, no bangs. Whispering, "Come on, boys, let me in. It's just me. Come on, it's karma." I wasn't utterly freaked out before, but I am now. I run to the bathroom and close the door quietly so he doesn't hear us moving around and knows where we are. Jonathan has already gotten off the phone with the 911 operator, and she says the police were on their way. 5 minutes pass and it's still quiet, so Jonathan wants me to go check if the men are still there. I look through the peephole and don't see anything. I sigh with relief, but then I think to check the parking lot to see if his truck is there. I go to our guest room with a view of the parking lot and peer through the blinds. His truck is parked right next to my vehicle, and I see that he's in the driver's seat of his truck. He's staring at me. Well, I can't be 100% sure, but it looks like we've locked eyes. I don't want to move out of fear that I'd be giving myself away on the off chance that he wasn't actually looking at me. He opens his truck door, and that breaks me from my stupefied state. I run back to the bathroom and tell Jonathan to lock the door, and I fill him in on the information. About 3 minutes pass before we hear a banging on the door. "Shit," I say under my breath. But then we hear, "County Police." I'd go check the peephole and it's an officer, so I open it and tell him what's going on. The officer says he saw the truck outside, but no one was in it. He says he was going to look around the apartment and see what he could find. Jonathan and I continue to camp out in the bathroom. All of the lights in our apartment are now off. We wait to hear from the officer, but within 10 minutes we start to hear crazed screaming, almost demonic noises, hisses, coughs, screams and laughs. My heart drops. I'm overcome with more fear than before. What's going on? 5 minutes later, the police officer came to our door and said that he found the man in the vacant apartment directly above ours. When the officer got there, the man was standing facing a corner and laughing under his breath. When the officer put the handcuffs on him, he began thrashing around, screaming and hissing. The officer told us that he had him in the cruiser and that they had arrested him on breaking and entering charges. When the police officer left, we checked the front of our door where there were now dents from the man's keys. He struck our door with them after being unable to get in. The next day we went upstairs with the manager of the apartment complex and we saw a small hole in the floor of the bathroom in the apartment. Apparently, the man must have known we were hiding in our bathroom, and he was trying to get there from the ceiling above us. Fortunately, he didn't have any heavy-duty tools to do the trick. This hole was made by a screwdriver being stabbed into the linoleum floor over and over again. So, creepy ex-neighbor? let's never meet again. I recently moved to this area. The house is nice, and as I've said before, the closer to the main road in this small town, the better. It's not a bad spot either, and we're right on the corner, so I can look out the window and watch the kids get off the bus. It's 2-bedroom. It used to be 3, but we pulled the bed out of that room after my daughter went to stay with her dad. Now that room is for the computer and various instruments my girlfriend plays. I honestly love this house. There's just one issue. We live right across the street from a church. Now some would think that that was actually nice, and I've had people say that it was just that. Most would be right, but we're pagan. I know it's not a big deal, but being right across the street from this church is no cakewalk. The front of our house has mud splattered all over it. Pretty sure someone saw the sticker on the door that read, "Of some paganist junk about God or something." We think they didn't care for that and got frisky and threw mud. Now, that's not really a big deal, and I honestly think the people of the church had nothing to do with it. My girlfriend seems to think they did, but I don't indulge her on it. There's more to this story, more that my girlfriend actually doesn't know. She works all day, and I stay home with our 2 boys. I mostly stick to the house, only stepping outside maybe once a week to play with the dogs or the boys. I'm not much for outdoor fun, and I'm very introverted. One day in particular, I was out on the front yard letting the boys look at spiders, when I noticed something odd about the church across the street. Cars were lined in a row, as if there was a service that day. It's not one of those churches where they hold anything on a Tuesday, so it was odd. I dropped the thought a few seconds later, when I told myself they must have been doing a fundraiser or something. Churches do that, right? I pointed out a beautiful cabinet spider to my youngest Neil. We were checking her out and I was explaining how they could catch food, when I heard a commotion across the street. I look up to see a group of people all shuffling from the church in a hurry. It looks like a family with a few added friends. There were 2 small girls looking to be twins, her parents, and 2 tall, lanky old men that look half dead. My boys looked to them mostly because I was just staring. Nell, my sweetest little weirdo, called out to them. He yelled a hello and began waving. I waved too and called out an apology. Seemed like the right thing to do. The parents kept walking and never looked up. Never waved at anything of the sort. I wasn't sure if they had heard, but then again the 2 girls looked at us and one of them waved. She was quickly stopped by one of the walking corpses that followed her. Was this like some weird cult stuff? Anyway, I thought this was a bit odd, so I told the boys to go inside while I went over and spoke to the parents there, in the hopes to getting them to come by and have a cup of coffee and invite the girls to play. It was neighborly. The boys went in, leaving JJ in charge, and I strolled through the ditch across the road and over the little parking lot. I waved at the father who was about to get into the car. This was all new to me, but I thought, why not let my boys make some new friends? The father, this man, was less friendly. He just shot me a glare as I got close enough to speak to him. I mustered up all my big girl superpowers and spoke. Hey there, I'm Sarah. I live right over here. I see you and your wife have 2 lovely girls. I look at the twins and smile. Everything was normal for 2 seconds. Then the smaller one spoke to me in such a defeated, tired little voice. We're not for sale. I chuckled a bit and turned to the father. Okay, weird kids. Well, she's sure something, I sang out in that southerly way. The man just glared at me, then looked to one of the walking dead that had escorted his children. They're not for sale, one tall man said, in such a dull, ugly voice it almost hurt to hear. I was confused. I looked at all of them and looked back at the father. I don't want to buy them, I say. I just thought that you and your wife could come by, have some coffee, and let the kids play together. Sound fun? That's when the woman, the mother, got out the car. She took off her sunglasses and glared at me. Her voice reminded me of the lady that asks for the manager. My girls wouldn't be caught dead with them two boys of yours. I've seen you, all of you. Lesbians, heathens, devil worshippers. God is watching, little girl, and he does not like what he sees. He will strike you down as his name. She held up her hand as if she was about to slap me. Instead, she held it up to the sky and kept on with her ramble. It dawned on me as she cast me out in the name of the Lord that they thought I wanted the girls' souls. It was then confirmed when the woman screamed, "And you will not buy my children. Their souls belong to him in Jesus' name." They honestly thought I wanted to buy their kids' souls or something. I never laughed so hard in my life. I apologized to them for bugging them and for upsetting them, and then returned home, all the while listening to that woman screech about God and this and that. I got back inside, looked to my boys who had been watching through the window the whole time, and Nell, as always, had something to say. "Mummy, if you buy those kids, can I keep one in my closet?" Thank you, whatever God is out there, for giving me such a weird child. This happened quite a few years back, when I was 14 years old. Let me just preface by saying that I had previously been told by my old best friend Jenna that her neighbor had some entirely creepy tendencies. I slept over her place a lot, but never encountered this neighbor. The guy was married and had children, and his house was directly behind Jenna's place. There was a wood fence in her backyard that separated the neighbor's backyard and theirs. Jenna had a deck, and the stairs were a few feet off from the house, so you could fit a fairly small person in between the deck stairs and the house. You could see into the neighbor's backyard if you were standing on the deck, but not if you were on the grass. With that understood, we had a half day at the school, so I went back to Jenna's place. I wasn't allowed over there that day, but since we were inseparable it didn't really matter, and we weren't expecting her mum to be home from work for a good few hours. Her mum ended up coming home early, so Jenna and I scrambled to the backyard so her mum wouldn't see me and not get in trouble. We went outside and wedged ourselves in between the stairs and house so her mum wouldn't hear the fence gates open, as it made a lot of noise whenever it was opened. We waited for a few minutes until we started hearing shuffling in her neighbor's backyard. We could faintly see him through the cracks of the wood, and it looked like he was putting out his recycling or garbage. Instead, he was making his way onto the bin and poking his head over the fence to look in the windows. From the backyard you could see into Jenna's mum's window, the bathroom, and parts of the kitchen. We saw him, but he didn't see us. We were shaking and holding onto each other for dear life as we watched her neighbor stand upright on the bin to get a better view into the windows. He kept shifting from bin to bin to get better angles, into what we assumed later was into Jenna's mum's room, since she got back from work and possibly into the bathroom. This continued for 5 to 10 minutes, us trembling and trying not to move or make a noise, while her creepy neighbor kept trying to peep in. He eventually got back down and went into his house like nothing had happened, while Jenna and I hopped on her fence gate soon after. A few weeks later we had another incident where Jenna's sister took a shower late at night and went into her room. Her blinds were open, it was dark outside, and there was a tree that sat in the front yard, and it was snowing pretty heavily. She called us on her phone, saying she saw someone in the trees and couldn't see them anymore. We told her to turn her light off, while Jenna and I did the same in her room. We peeked out the window but couldn't see anything. We went into her sister's room and asked what happened. She was convinced she saw someone in the trees who she believed was their neighbor. So Jenna and I went out to the front to investigate. By that time he was gone, but we did find fresh shoe prints in the snow that went from the neighbor's front yard to the tree, then right up to Jenna's sister's window, before it trailed off back to the neighbor's house. My friend always wanted to report him, but her mum always shrugged it off and said he's not harming anyone, so let it be. Jenna got a boyfriend near the end of our friendship, and he also saw some of the creepy stuff that went on, and he gave the guy a fright and threatened him if he ever tried doing anything like that again. From what I'm aware of, I don't think he peeps anymore, or maybe he just got better at it. This happened years ago, but haunts me to this day. Back when I was in middle school, I lived next to a small neighborhood. All I had to do was hop the fence and I'd be in the neighborhood where all my friends lived. We were all between the ages of 12 to 13 and there were 5 of us. One of the houses we were in always had a backyard on the edge of the woods. We had created trails through it, complete with bridges over the creek that led to a reservoir of sorts, where all the rainwater went as well as the water that drained from the sewers. I say sewers, but it's runoff from the street that we used the tunnels under the road during intense games of manhunt. We called that place the Wall. The wall backed up quite literally onto our house in the neighborhood and the next street over, and we could clearly see houses through the trees in any direction we looked, so it was not like we were ever far. Besides the trails we took, there was a main exit along the fence to the house aforementioned that led straight into the heart of the neighborhood. Now the wall was right by the next street over. On our side, where the wall sat, there were 3 houses. In one of those houses lived a very well-known police officer whose kids we were friends with. The opposite side had some massive farmland to the left and a heavily wooded area to the right, complete with its own empty, boarded-up creepy house that couldn't be seen from the road unless it was winter. No one had lived there or been in there for years. So like I said, I'm just trying to paint a picture here so you can understand. We were very, very close to other homes, which made this story an odd one. One day my friend and I, just 2 girls, decided to go to the wall, taking the familiar trails through the woods, and we made it to the wall. Weeks prior to this, a group of us had been trying to make a bridge so we could continue our work between picking up branches and heaving stones, when we noticed something coming from the woods across the street. A man. This man was dressed head to toe in camouflage, typical hunting gear that I've seen before. The weird thing was he had a shotgun in his hand, in a residential area. Luckily we noticed him before he did us, and I'm so glad we did. When he noticed us, his eyes locked on both of us, and his pace began to quicken, and he made a beeline straight towards us. He never said a word or even lowered his weapon. It was just in his hands, ready to give at any moment. We snap out of it and take the exit, sprinting into the heart of the neighborhood, running straight to my friend's house to tell someone. We tell her dad immediately, and he goes to check it out, only to find that no one was there. Not a trace. I don't know where or how that man was out of sight so quickly. Her dad wasted no time and was down there in seconds. The wooded area where the man came from was not large, at least not large enough to ever consider hunting on it, and it was definitely not hunting land. It is an extremely residential area along an elementary school that we used to walk to in less than 5 minutes. So I never understood why the man was out there, especially since there was a cop who lived right next door to where we were. To the hunter, I hope we never meet. That incident scared us so badly we stopped playing in the woods and never returned to the wall. Hey guys, it's Mort here and thank you so much for listening. I hope that you enjoyed tonight's neighborly edition. I don't really know my neighbors very well. Maybe I should. I hope none of them are creeps. To be fair, one of the houses next to us is completely empty because the guy lives elsewhere and he says he's not coming back till December, which is fun. And the other neighbor on the other side is out of town. So yeah, I've currently got no neighbors, and the guy in front, he's alright. So yeah, I don't really know them though. I hope you guys are okay with your neighbors. As always, a huge thank you to my wonderful and amazing patrons whose names are on screen. If you would like your name on screen, look no further than the link in the description to my Patreon page. Donating as little as $1 a month really helps out a lot, and it means a great deal to me to help the channel keep running. And the more you donate, the more cool little perks you get for doing so. So consider it. It really does help me out. If there's a story about something that's happened to you that you would like to share, you can find all pertinent information like the Reddit link and the email address in the description. Please just be generous with your paragraphing and punctuational stuff, as that will determine whether I read your story or not. In any case, it's time for me to sign off. So stay awesome, and I'll see you in the next one.